Okay,
Oh, really?
we're good to go.
And you know how those are, you can't never change them, because you'll never get another one.
No, it'll take like a year to get them. All right, let's get this party started. This is the Upper Perkiomen School District's Educational Programs and Services Committee. I am your chair, Mike Elliott. I am joined by my esteemed colleagues from the school board, Emily McCormick, JP Prego, and Dana Hipser. Now there are so many, oh, and hey! Penny Packer's here too. How about that? He's like hiding back behind there.
We don't get that reaction.
Just so, hey, got a big loud intro there too. Okay, let's, just for the sake of argument, if the folks here from the staff could go around and introduce themselves. Let's start with this guy.
I'm Jeff Freeze. I'm the principal at Hertford.
Amy Coyle, Special Education Supervisor.
Jen Senovitis, High School Assistant Principal.
Brian Callen, Middle School Assistant Principal.
I'm Allison Stevens on the Marlboro Elementary School.
Carol Gibbler, the Director of Special Education.
Andrea Farina, the Assistant Superintendent.
Kim Bass, Director of Curriculum and Instruction. I was waiting for JC to go.
And what do you do?
We already got them, they're fine.
Sorry, I'm Sarah Rothermel, I'm the curriculum supervisor.
Excellent. All right, so we have a great turnout tonight, which is awesome. And starting with our agenda, we'll do the approval of the November 17th Education Programs and Services minutes. Do I have a motion?
Motion? Second.
Okay, having a first and a second, is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a motion to, or I'll call for the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next up, this is always a great part to, I think, I always like hearing about this, the PAYS and PA Climate Survey presentation and mental health, behavioral health services and sports. So, who's starting off for us?
It's me. And,
Nice.
and hunker down, because once a year, I abscond the entire meeting. And back when it was only an hour, I went way over. So I'm grateful for this window. Relax.
Wait, you said you were going to go over the two?
They're all like, what? No, but I think that every year I try to give the board and the community a picture of perceptual data that's received from our students, who are the most important stakeholders. And these two surveys happen to be around school safety, mental and behavioral health. And so we're going to do a little bit of a data walk from the most recent PAYS and Climate survey. So for context sake, both of those surveys are now foundational to all grants that are written for the federal government or for the state. So when I arrived here in the 14-15 school year, we did not do either of these surveys. We quickly did them in 15, 17, 19, and 21. We've administered the PACE survey in the district, and in every year, annually, we do the PA Climate Survey. That's grades 3 through 12. PACE is grades 6, 8, 10, and 12. It's voluntary. Parents consent. These are always some questions I get out of the way right away. And any child can abandon participation even if they have consent, if they feel uncomfortable. So just for context sake for the board, because I know there have been questions about that over time. Every year that the PAYS is done, the county issues the county PAYS, and we each get a district. They move to digital, which is much appreciated, and I can show you that at the very end. But what I've done for you is we've looked at patterns of PAYS over the years in order to write our grants, to make recommendations for programs and services, as well as personnel. And so I'm going to show you a picture of that data, both the PAYS and the climate data, explain how that fits into our mental and behavioral health framework, and talk to you about the efforts that all of these folks here have done over time. And so we aren't going to go through everything, I promise. It's a lot. But I did want to give you some of the high-profile questions that we use in decision-making as a department. They are broken up by category, and so underneath, everyone has a document that looks like this. I know you can't see it up close, because you know I like to give you guys small, really small. font. It will be behind you, not that it's better, and this will be online and you can zoom. So our mental health concerns questions start with questions for students in 6, 8, 10, and 12 related to, their status and their perception of themselves. And so I've tried to highlight for you instances where you will find that we have seen an increase. So, for example, there is an increase in students in 6, 8, 10, and 12 who feel depressed in general about life. We saw significant increases noted for two grade levels, 8th and 10th grade. And I would have to say, as we look across, on the ground, boots on the ground, we see a lot of kids seeking out mental health services. Even though they're not assessed, we'll tell you elementary students are pretty much in the same boat. There was a significant increase in 8th and 10th graders who report feeling depressed about themselves in particular. And so when you look at these graphs, the dots are the state percentage. And then ours are 17, 19, and 21. And so you can see some of this data ebbs and flows, these in particular. So when we flip over, the other questions in this category is a consideration of whether they feel like they are a self-failure or if they've inflicted self-harm. And they usually are asking kids within a calendar year if they've experienced that. So 20% of all students surveyed reported that they feel like a failure. Our secondary students reported an increase of feeling of self-failure. So 6, 8, and 10. So we saw an increase from 19 to 21. And then all students in all grades reported percentages which are lower than the state average. I think it's important that, we often get the question, right? How are we doing internally? How do we compare to others? So while we saw increases in students feeling like they were a failure, compared to their peers across the state, we have a lower population of those kids. We did see a 6% increase in 6th and 12th graders who are reporting self-harm. And self-harm looks like a lot of different things. Reports of cutting, other types of self-inflicted injury are things that often rise to the attention of principals, counselors, and quite frankly, teachers. They might be the first reporter. A lot of our information comes from Safe to Say. Peers are reporting their peers injuring themselves, and that's something that we take very seriously.
Does this question, when this is a question that's asked of them, and are they specific with what a self-harm includes? So
the answer to yes, cutting would be an example, but they could interpret other types of self-harm outside of those questions. We saw an increase across all grades in self-harm. However, all are lower than the state average. Doesn't make it okay, but it's for context. As we progress down the mental health continuum, they also ask other behavioral type questions like, are you sleeping? Are you sleeping 7 hours? Because developmentally in adolescence, that's the recommendation. Well, 57% of seniors report sleeping less than 7 hours. They're our highest group. Now, I think when we think about students in these age groups, we think they also are probably the most involved in extracurricular, co-curricular, and/or employment. So, are those factors? This was an increase a little bit in each of our subgroups, but it also was on the heels of a pandemic. So can some of that be attributed to them needing to go to work? So those are questions we ponder. These don't give us the answers, they give us points of inquiry. The majority of our middle school students report sleeping 7 hours or more. Yeah.
But they're not doing their homework.
Well, stay tuned. They're doing other things. They are definitely doing other things. Now, kids feel tired. Our middle school kids, though, they may sleep, but they're still exhausted. 6th and 8th graders in particular. Our responses are, really in some of these age groups, a little higher than what the peers across the state are reporting. And those are the type of observable behaviors that teachers look for, and you guys can jump in. But, kids falling asleep in class, kids not engaged, kids feeling, those are things that we see on the surface as indicators or warning signs that perhaps something is not right.
That's consistent, though. Like, the behavior has to be consistent.
Yeah, I
Like, if
think
kids
we've all
shows
been a
up, they're
little,
nodding off, maybe they just had a bad night,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. And I think, when we talk a little bit about our framework, SAF is one of the vehicles where kids get support. And that is one of the questions, are they engaged? Are they attentive? Do they sleep a lot? Is their affect changing? Those kinds of questions are what teams start to unpack in order to support kids. Food stability is something that this district, over time since I've been here, has had some challenges with. I think that since 2017, there is less of a concern. I think you'll see that there are more support organizations. We instituted a backpack program run out of our schools where all of our students who are in need of food, access to food over the weekend because they can't get to the open link or there are no access or funds, we send them home with backpacks full of food every Friday to sustain them over the weekend. So that started back in 2017, and so we feel like that may be a way to reach kids. All of our students who are our homeless and foster population is generally where we see that. 10% of 6th graders report that they're concerned, which is really higher than the state average. So we have kids coming out of 5th grade, entering 6th grade, wondering where their next meal is coming from. And so that's an interesting dynamic because, perhaps it's maturity related, they're becoming more aware of what's happening in their home where, our younger students may not be privy or understand that type of a dynamic. So we do have about 3% of our kids reporting that they have to skip meals in general because there's no food to be had. And while that seems small, that's 3% of kids who aren't coming ready. They're not prepared. And that is, a fundamental basic need. Maslow says you have to have your essential needs met to even engage in academics. So we have kids across the district who just aren't there. So the other piece of this that I want to share with you is something that there's a stigma, there's a concern about free and reduced lunch. That is a program, if you are below the poverty line as a family, that you have access to free and or reduced lunch. I know, and I can speak for the principals, we encourage families to pursue that. It's confidential. No one ever accesses it. And truthfully, it benefits them in terms of those are our kids who are getting backpacks. So I don't know if you guys want to weigh in, but sometimes it's a commitment to working with those families to get them there. So.
I mean, at least looking at the data, it looks like we're trending in the right direction. At least I would have thought that post-pandemic it would have shot up the other way, but.
Well, and interesting, I wonder, Upper Perk made a huge push to feed families. We also had the benefit of free commodities during that window where everyone ate for free, right? And then when we were out of school, Paula and her crew ran a program like clockwork, seamless, where people were getting food. So, I think absent of that, we may have seen a really significant increase. But I anticipated it being more. I will say the Open Link has done a wonderful job with their food pantry. And they have engaged the district and our student assistance counselors in making sure those food pantry referrals are flying through. And so, I think that collaboration and relationship has facilitated greater access to food for many of our families. So those are all promising efforts between community and school.
What's our percentage of free and reduced right now?
about 30%.
Yeah, it's,
And at Hereford, in the last 10 years, when I originally was here, it's around 32%, and it has steadily increased over the years, and we are at about 38, 39% right now, free and reduced lunch.
yeah, I mean, 40% is school-wide.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're.
District budget?
Yeah, I mean, a whole school would
Right.
benefit we get funding for our free and reduced numbers. So certain schools are eligible based on their percentage of free and reduced students. And so, but once you hit 40%, those services can be deployed to all kids in the building, as opposed to just those students who are Title eligible.
So right now we have 2 Title I buildings. It's Hereford Elementary and the 4-5, and that's based on there are 2 highest schools of free and reduced lunch numbers. And so because we're still under 40%, we rank and serve which students need that based on the data we collect at the beginning of the year. If we hit 40%, we're able to apply for a school-wide program, which means we can service all students. So it's also a lot more paperwork to get there, but it's worth it.
Yes, it is.
We don't want to get here, do we?
No, we don't.
No, we wanna
don't
go
have that
backwards,
situation.
but-
We want to be able to help more kids.
Right.
Right now, I mean, there are some students, you know, we struggle with this sometimes. We have a Title I reading specialist and we have a regular reading specialist, and so kids need help beyond that. And so if it were school-wide, we could do a little bit more with the resources that we have. Right now, our Title I people can only serve Title I kids.
Yeah, Title was originally meant back in the 60s to level the playing field. Right, so to be able to provide that equity that we so often talk about today.
So that's the questions, some of the questions that we've considered historically since 2015. Our counselors and I work with the county in order to help program and plan around this. And the next pocket of questions that we have since that first administration focused on is transitions and mobility. And, whoops, boy, I'm falling behind here. So when we think about transitions, you've heard me say, whoo, we have lots of kids who are, don't have housing, are changing houses. We have some buildings, Hereford, where it happens very frequently, Hereford and the high school, are 2 buildings where we see a ton of transition. Some,
Hereford Estates has an effect on all of that, right?
yeah, there's definitely a pocket in that area, but, you know, the loss of housing, there is a McKinney-Vento, its eligibility. We did a presentation last year about foster or homeless, and, you know, if you are losing housing, then because of an economic reason, domestic violence, being kicked out, evicted, natural disaster, you become eligible. So amongst our 6th and 8th grade populations, we've seen a big increase in the loss of housing. That was a population that was fairly stable. 6th grade went from 10.9% to 14.2%. Now, this ran simultaneous with the pandemic. And I think we all were astutely aware that people were really struggling to maintain employment. We saw a lot of people have to double up where they were evicted or lost jobs and housing, so they moved in with a friend, a family member. And if that is not by choice, but by necessity, they become eligible under that provision. Our 8th graders went from about 12.5% to 13%. And so once you are determined to have lost housing in that capacity, the district is required to provide you services and transportation from wherever you end up. And we talked about that a little bit. So, you know, the district is making consistent moves around housing stability, which is why it becomes an important factor. I think from a instructional perspective, our kids with unstable housing, it's very difficult to get them here, get them engaged, and have instruction be their priority as opposed to supporting their families.
If I could add, when I was in Allentown, I served a school where 50% of the population moved during the school year, right? So you started with half, right? By the end of the year, it was a totally different group. What was different with that was that they were community schools, so I could walk a couple of blocks and knock on the door. Kids here, we're busing them long distances in some cases, and it's not easy for them. If they miss that bus, they might not necessarily have that transportation to get into school that day, just as an example.
Yeah, and I mean, to Jeff's point, you know, we don't have a district social worker, so all of that is facilitated, number one, by Jen Malone, in terms of transportation. And then the instructional and programmatic side are by myself and our counselors and principals. So sometimes, you know, we're trying to find kids. We're trying to figure out what their home situation, and very often, you know, it doesn't seem like a lot, but when we have hands full of kids, you know, 2% of our 8th graders, and you know, they could change 3 or more times. They go to the motel, they go to the camping ground, they go to grandmoms, they go to uncles, and so you keep trying to follow them because our obligation is always they get an education wherever they're at. And so I can't say enough for our counselors and our principals who make those phone calls, as Jen and Crystal also facilitate a lot of that conversation to try and find our kids, which can be very difficult. Here's our 3% of our students report living in a shelter, car, or motel at some point during last school year. I think we just had a conversation today about a student I had a conversation today, just gonna live in my car. Well, it's winter. That can't be the answer. So, you know, the other piece is that we consider is children who no longer live in the custody of their biological custodial parents. 11% of our seniors during that year were kicked out of their home and outside of the supervision of their custodial parents.
That's just seniors.
Correct. They're our highest population. I will tell you, for the first time since I've been here, I've had to identify 2 elementary students as unaccompanied youth. They're called unaccompanied youth. So to have to make that decision about a 7-year-old is a little bit concerning.
What is that?
That means mom and dad drop them off and that's it. So now we have to find somebody to supervise them, to take responsibility for them. And, you know, those are hard conversations to have about kids, and their housing stability gets a little dicey. So, you know.
Where does children and youth come into play, if at all, in any of this?
So we make a lot of children and youth referrals, and we try to engage them, but their bandwidth is stretched. Their bandwidth is stretched. You know, if there's a child with a roof over their head and they're coming to school and they have access to food because it makes them eligible for free and reduced meals, they're doing okay compared to some of the cases children and youth are taking. Doesn't sound good, but fortunately we do have a lot of supportive families in the district who do and are willing to help. If you're part of the Upper Domestic Violence Task Force, that group meets 3 times a year, and the one thing we really don't have here is a shelter. We have no shelters. So right now, the conversation that we're having today about a child in this circumstance is, I actually don't know where they're going to sleep because I don't have a shelter, and they're a minor, and so they become a ward of the state. Those are the kinds of experiences our kids are having. Proportionally, probably less than Allentown, but it's gut-wrenching, just one. So that's something the Domestic Violence Task Force has talked a lot about, families who are fleeing domestic violence and or families who lose stable housing. We're shipping them up to Easton's and Reading and trying to find, but then we have to go get them. Right. So, you know, that's something that stakeholder group has talked pretty extensively about, and we will continue. There is a huge push from Montgomery County in this part of the county to to create a shelter in our area that would be closer. And, I mean, and as it goes, if you build it, they will come. So, you know, there's a lot of restrictions and controls around what that would look like. So when we go from mental health, we're painting a picture of what our kids are experiencing.
Jesus.
Hey,
Good news.
listen,
There's no good news.
there's no good news in this presentation.
That's why they say rub mints.
There are good people here to talk about it, but this is,
We have good people.
there are good people. So when we think about sad, sadness is a range of emotion. We all feel it. We're allowed to feel it. We should feel it. It's when we alter our life because of it. And so you will see, we saw a decrease in kids participating in activities because of that overwhelming sense of sadness. Almost a third of 10th and 12th grade students reported feeling so sad that they just stopped engaging. And so we know in our arena that when kids get in that state and then they self-isolate, that is incredibly, that is a trajectory that we want to intervene in fairly quickly. So 17% of 8th graders reported they considered suicide. This is higher than any other grade level. You will see a pattern here where our 8th grade students really have some alarming risk behaviors. 13.1% of secondary students reported considering. So 8th grade being, who are our current 9th graders, and Brian and Jen are probably like, yep. But this is the highest level we've seen since 2017. So, and in a district where we have been really impacted by suicide, we dug in and we did a ton of work that showed that we were making an impact to kids. The pandemic put us right back in to a situation where kids they're in a tough spot starting last school year. And we knew that, right? I mean, I think everybody was worried about that. So all of these questions are going to make you feel sad, I'm sorry. But, you know, when we think about the planning of suicide, and 3% increase overall in the percentage of our population. So we have 11% of 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders who have planned to end their life. So there is a difference between planning, attempting, and completing. Those are difficult conversations to have, but we did see an increase in students who have attempted suicide. 10th graders reported the most significant increase of having attempted suicide. And if you look at our sort of data in attempted suicides, we're really kind of, you know, we made a big drop in 2019. We saw a peak a little increase in 8th, a significant increase in 10th. Our seniors stayed fairly consistent with the number of students, and then overall we were in an increase. I think when we look at this from a counseling department, we are, I don't want to say not surprised, but the folks around this table sit side by side with our student assistance counselors as they're completing risk assessments. They're at a volume I've never seen in my life, and we'll talk about that. So that's a challenge. So the next area, also not great today, sorry, is violence and drugs. And this is one we hear a lot from our parents, stakeholders. So we saw a decrease in middle and high school kids being offered drugs at school. Well, isn't that's wonderful.
They weren't there, right?
I mean, they missed a whole year. You know, you think it's great, but perhaps there might be a reason.
Let's celebrate the small victories.
Yeah, so.
Assuming they're being offered by other students?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, yes.
By teachers?
Yeah, I was like, yes. Heck, yes.
That's what I think
have
of
a parking
school
lot,
So, I mean, less than 1% of kids said they've been offered a weapon, and that is referred to as a gun. However, 2.3% of our last year seniors said they brought a gun. So they're not.
Wait, what? Say that
Yeah.
again? Sorry.
So our seniors last year, 2.3% of seniors reported that they had brought a gun to school.
We're not talking hunting rifles, right?
So they may not have been offered, but 2.3, now those kids have graduated, but, I mean, that's an interesting, it just seems off to me. They weren't offered, but they brought them. So, you know,
Not to go off track, but did you see Altoona School Police are packing AR-15s?
Saverton
What?
Area High School has 2 AR-15s, so.
Years past?
So when we,
Sorry.
when we talk about threats and attacks, our data revealed that in all grades but 10th, student reported decreases in being threatened at school. Now remember, when we look at the efforts we've made, we also have school security personnel in our middle and high school as well, which could contribute, hopefully, to deter some of that behavior. 13% of our secondary students reported being threatened, which is a decrease from 16.7 in 2019. All of our averages of threats at school are lower than the state. 5.6% of our students report that they have been attacked. It does not definitively describe attack, right?
So it could be verbal, it could be physical.
It could be, you know, and the way it's coded in PIMS is like, it's a simple assault or it's assault. And so we differentiate in the level of attack. We refer to them as assaults in school code. It's referred to as an attack, but it doesn't operationally define it, no. Our middle school students are reporting that that type of behavior happens more than in high school. Threatened with a weapon. So, you know, we're looking at 1.5%, but remember, they're not being offered, and seniors report bringing them, but our kids report being threatened. And it could be just a verbal threat, like I'm gonna shoot you. You know, it does not differentiate, but that's 1.5%. 12th graders actually reported the highest. They're also the ones who reported bringing.
Right.
So, you know, I think there's a relationship there. So less than 1%, 1.5% of 12th graders report being attacked. So, you know, these are very low, but they're commensurate with the state, ironically. And these are urban and suburban and rural schools being surveyed. So some of that school violence takes place adjacent, maybe not in the building, that we've seen. So that, you know, our weapons violation, but threats, and whether physical or verbal. And you'll see a little more data in our PACE, because PACE and PA Climate have similar questions about that, and it'll be interesting for you to see. Pro-social involvement. So this investigates kids, so risk factors, and then there are protective factors. So pro-social involvement in activities is a protective factor. The more connected you feel, the more engaged you are, the less likely you are to engage in risky behaviors. Substance abuse, violence, self-harm. So when you think about that, it asks, what is your participation in community activities? There was a reduction in overall participation. 6th and 8th graders reported a 10% decline in participation. Now, context matters. We had just come out of the pandemic. There was nothing happening here. There was nothing going on. But our kids still are more engaged than their peers across the state.
So we're crushing it there.
Yeah, I mean, it's 40% of our students say they definitely participate in family events and activities. They are an engaged group with whatever their family is doing. There has been a continued decline, though, since 2017. So we've seen a little bit, a teeny bit in family-supported activities. So these are like, Cub Scouts.
Yeah.
Like, or if you go hiking as a family, or you go on vacations or field trips, or you do something as a family. So you'll see. So pro-social activities, school-sponsored events. Our eighth grade took a pretty drastic nosedive in participation. But if you look, our sixth graders, there was a reduction. Our eighth graders, there was a reduction. Our 10th graders, and our 12th graders. So we lost about 10% of students participating in school-sponsored activities.
I mean, a lot of that has to do with COVID, right? I mean, there's so much that can happen in a normal 6th to 8th grade. There's, even you really start that socialization, and I mean, I think
it is
really.
It's hard to look at these because when it talks about school or any kind of community, those weren't available to kids for the better part of a school year.
And now they don't know that what that is and what that feels like and what that can become. So it just like snowballs. I feel like there's not.
The unfortunate part is like we won't be able to back that up or prove it until another 2 years when we get data again.
Yep. Faith-based organizations, we talked with the ministerium about this earlier this year. Our participation is slightly higher than the state, which is 18%, and we're, as a district, 20%. But there's been a decrease in participation in faith-based in many of our assessed groups. So our 6th graders, our 10th graders, our 12th graders was, very little decrease. But we talked with our faith community at the ministerium luncheon, and they are astutely aware of sort of the loss of participation and seeking ways to re-engage families across the district. Because, I mean, they were, in the 30s, like you think about 6th graders, 30% of our 6th graders. I will say they're very proud. They run a program for 8th graders, and you can see that program paid off. And so they were quick to point out, we did that on purpose. Like, we know what that is, and they were able to pinpoint that. But I think it's, I think us having those discussions, and they asked specifically for this data in order to plan those types of activities. So, volunteerism, again. We weren't accepting any volunteers. We weren't asking kids to go out and do any kind of volunteering for National Honor Society, National Junior Honor Society. The kids were essentially on lockdown across many of those opportunities. So we did see a decrease in all grade levels in participation in volunteerism. So we're hoping, as we opened the doors last year, our next iteration of this, hopefully we'll see that come back to something similar. And honestly, we saw a little bit across time, because if you look at 2017, our rates were really high in volunteerism. Like our 12th graders, like if you look at 12th from 2017 to 2019 to 21, that's, so we have to ask ourselves questions like what was going on that ran parallel to that. Jobs and employment. Interesting, our 10th graders increased their access to employment, and our 12th graders essentially stayed the same. So we pondered about did they need to seek employment post-pandemic to support their families. What we do see is our kids are either greater than the state in terms of going out there and getting to work. But it's a diverse state, too. The need to work looks different, and quite frankly, it looks very different in our county, the need to work. So commitment and involvement in school. So this is the next subgroup that investigates their perception of their actual building and what's happening. So, you know, this is a hard one for me because I feel like these are variables that we have the most control over or influence on, maybe not control, but all of our students reported less engagement in school than their peers across the state. Sixth graders reported the most significant decline in school enjoyment. So our 7.7% decrease. Only 32.3% of students surveyed reported that they enjoyed coming to school.
So school enjoyment means coming to school? Or
So they came,
They enjoy being
but
here.
they did not want to be here. So we only had 32% of kids who said, yes, we want to be here. So when we talk about the influence of the classroom teacher or the staff within buildings, 76% of students reported that they have chances to talk to their teachers one-on-one. This is actually an increase from our last survey, an 8% increase. So our kids are saying, like, no, when I go to school, my teachers, they can talk to me. They're willing to listen to me. They're willing to dialogue with me. Yeah. And I think sometimes...
There's increase somewhere.
Does this vet out why they don't enjoy school?
It doesn't. It
I
doesn't.
would guess that it's because of the, well, no, but I
They
think
enjoy
it,
being at home.
Well,
learning from
it
home.
could be, I actually think it's the kind of push to make them ready for their tests, you know, and the amount of focus on that, and maybe like they're not having as much fun doing as many other activities that they used to do, because that focus has to be so, you know, impressed upon them, so they are ready for these tests, they're taking, you know.
yeah, I mean, there's no question that it runs simultaneous with the expectation that Keystone, you must, as a high school student, you know, like, those expectations have ramped up, and, you know, it ebbs and flows, right? We have pathways in lieu of the Keystones, but kids may not they may not understand that. So like, there's so many, why might that be? You know, why could kids not want to be here?
Yeah, there's
And
a lot of factors.
there are a ton of factors. But to your point, so these are, you know, very like 30,000 foot surveys, but, you know, we've talked internally, and I know Jeff does this at Harvard, it's a building-based survey, which gives you more tangible information to use and make decisions about, which I think is helpful. Our 8th graders reported the highest level of sort of satisfaction and opportunity, you know, to work with their teachers, which is awesome, you know? So, well done, 8th grade. This one may go with Emily's concern, but this is one that like breaks my actual heart when I see it. And as you can see the trajectory, it's absolutely in the wrong direction. So they feel like their work is meaningful and important. Only 26% of kids feel like what they're being asked to do in middle and high school is even meaningful. It's a 20% reduction since 2017.
Is that an instructional issue?
So, you know, when I hear meaning and value, I think relevance. And so I think, what are they being asked to do in class? And please weigh in, my fellow administrators. And do they see where it's going? And the notion of relevance was one that even when I was in high school, I was like, why? It's the answer to the question that we all ask. What am I ever going to do with this?
Right.
And if you don't have the answer to that, then why would kids feel it's important? If you're not connecting, now, all of the wheels have been turning to get that end in mind for kids. So all the college and career work, all those connections, all of that work standards, those are all so kids don't have to ask that question, it's so they can see it. So is it instructional?
Yeah, and I mean, it's not necessarily subject, but delivery.
Well, and I think, to your point, it's all of those things. And Context matters. Research says if I don't understand why, even us, if I don't understand the why, I don't remember it, I don't have a vested interest in it. So when we write curriculum, we really focus on those essential questions and the why we have to learn this. And then when we're delivering it, we say to students, or we should say to students, is this something you love? Are you passionate about this? Here are some careers that relate to this particular area. I do think we're getting there. I think a lot of it too is challenging kids at the correct level of difficulty and wanting to treat them gingerly coming back from COVID. You know, I don't want to watch kids struggle too much because I'm worried about that becoming too much of a problem and upsetting them. So I think that it's a bunch of those factors. And to Andrea's point, we're working on all of them because I think it makes a difference. I've seen great things, and Jen, you were just commenting on some teachers who are using some of the strategies from TLS that you saw in the classroom.
But could it also be that some of, over the last couple of years, put all of that together on top of the kids that replied, for this survey? So that could have an impact as well, not just per se instruction.
100%.
Everything could always be better.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at, do they feel like it's important later in their life? Last year, less than 25% of 10th graders and 31% of 12th graders felt like what they were learning was going to impact their life at all. We saw a slide in meaning and relevance to later in life take a 20% slide. That causes a great deal of pause in us and concern, because we aren't perhaps making those connections visible. And that's work that we have to do administratively to ask those questions. And when we're supervising and writing curriculum and doing those things, like that has to be on the surface for kids.
If I could add, just at the high school level, I think the data shows too that kids are working because they have to. At the high school level, they're juggling food issues, homelessness, potentially. And so you come to school because you're going to have a meal per se, and you're not necessarily engaged in what you're learning because the other stuff is the need to survive. So I know when we talk to kids and you really break down whether it's discipline or you sit with counselors and you listen to the story, and then they leave and you say, well, no wonder, you're not engaged. And so it's about being creative with what you share with staff to help them kind of break that barrier and make it applicable to their current situation.
Could also be like just their perceptions changed a little bit with seeing what's happened to their parents and like families and brothers and sisters throughout the pandemic with, or they got a high school education or they got a college education. Well, that didn't matter in 2020 because their place of work shut down or they lost their job or something like that. So does this really matter in the end? They could be questioning it a lot more because their eyes were open to it because of
A lot of
that.
that too, JP, and death. A lot of people had to face the death of a loved one or someone that they knew. So it really puts everything
Puts it in perspective, right?
We didn't have to, I don't remember that when I was in high school.
Yeah.
So the good news
Huh?
is that when asked, so listen, they may not know why they're there or what it's going to do for them in their future, but they do feel like they get to be a part of something. And so our kids report that they can engage with their teachers and their class, and that's higher than their peers in some cases. So 8th grade, again, shout out to 8th grade, they reported the highest level of access and opportunity to really dialogue with their peers and talk about things. Praise is a different story. Only about 44% of our kids said they get rewarded for doing the right thing or hard work, which is, we all love affirmation. Good job, way to go, that was nice, thanks for that. And how do we integrate that? And we're taking some steps, and you'll see, to have that climate and culture discussion about, and even if it's not, it doesn't have to be A+ work to get praise. And that's, you don't have to be perfect. You just got to bring it. You got to do the best you can. And so, we have to continuously encourage staff to give that supportive feedback to kids.
Well, and I think that goes hand in hand with knowing why they're doing it too, right? If they feel like, why am I doing this? And then they don't get any feedback and they're not getting any praise, it's like, well, why am I gonna keep doing it?
Right, I'm out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Part of it too is though, I think, is how they view praise, what their definition of praise is. So if I say to Sarah, I say, good job, right? Sarah's like, yeah, you know, but maybe Sarah's like, well, if you really were excited, you post it on Facebook and you throw, you know, have all your friends like it. Just, I mean, you know, so that I think there's this is just my opinion. You know, take that as you will. I think there's a difference in how kids see praise. And I think that in this era of social pressures and social media pressures, that plays a part in it somehow, and that it's almost like the praise has to be more so.
Well, maybe their senses have been dulled too, you know what I mean? So it's that good job
I
doesn't
think
do what
I think that's some of it.
it used to do.
One of the things that you just made me think of, I know the school-wide PBIS for that's implemented K-5, one of the biggest things when I was in it some years back, it is always what you just said. Me going up to Allie and saying good job versus me going up to Allie and saying, Allie, you did a wonderful job walking quietly down the hallway, you know, and things like that. So for staff to be really specific with their praise,
Yes.
I think is a great thing. And I know that's a strong push with school-wide as well.
Mike touched on, you know, something that's going to bring up later that, you know, we talk pandemic, but, you know, how much of this stuff is affected with social media? Because, you know, the older ones around this table never had to deal with that, of course. But today, it's just everywhere. And when I deal with the legal stuff that I deal with athletics, it permeates that. It's everything. And it's like, how
On the news, I saw, I think it was last night, where, I forget what they had, like a term or a phrase for it, but students now, like high schoolers and like college students are going to flip phones.
I saw that too.
Did you see that? And the reason being, they are recognizing that they need to escape some of those things and
that's
really kind of go back to like how we probably all used phones.
And it was also kind of around, they also didn't want anything posted on social media. They wanted to just be able to, if I need to get in touch with you, I can, but
Yeah.
that's all I need to be able to do.
Well, the thing I love the most about it, which I think we probably all can relate to, is just wanting to be in the moment with the people that they were with.
Right.
And recognizing that when they are, you know, on their phones or whatever, they're not really in the moment. They're not in the present with the people that they're with. So
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty.
Dana, I feel so lucky you and I didn't have to deal with anything.
I'm glad.
Well, and high school kids, students love stickers. Like, I know that sounds, so I ordered a bunch of meme stickers for someone at the high school to put on tests. And I went in there and you should see them light up. And I'm like, these are stickers. Like, you know, and you would think like, but they say like, great job with the funny looking meme.
It's so
And
true.
It is so true.
I used to have sticker books.
You're so right, Jen, I remember
I was thinking-
that.
Right?
And, you know, one of the things I worry about is that, and I see this with some students, well, I did something, what do I get? And you get the reward for doing the right thing.
Yeah.
You know, so there's this,
Intrinsic.
right. Well, the research says what makes it intrinsic is that they see meaning in what they're doing and they find success in what they're doing. That's what the research says. I think I've shared with this group before, they gave away cell phones to kids who would do their homework. And it didn't increase the kids who were doing their homework because they were just like, that extrinsic reward didn't do for them what we hoped it would. So praise is really important, it's specific, it's timely, it's all that good stuff, but there's also sometimes you're just supposed to do the right thing. And there's nothing in it for you. You know, we have this what's in it for me. So I just worry a little bit about that. I don't think that's what we're setting up here, but it reminded me.
Or like you just feel good about yourself because you held the door for someone, or, you know, you did something nice for somebody, which is something that we all, you know, in our school district push, you know, for kindness. So.
Kindness and safety.
Yep.
And so the last question in this category on the PACE survey, and that we're going to talk about in PACE, is their feeling of safety at school. And 80% of our kids surveyed from 6 to 12 are reporting that, yes, in fact, They do feel safe. They feel safe. It's a little bit lower than the state, which was at 82%, but we've seen an increase since 2019. So that's good. So that paints one picture. That's our secondary picture. Every spring, we repeat the PA Climate Survey, and that's done through PDE. And every year, I show you the same slides, but so I will not give you the same PA Climate lecture I give every year, but we use it for climate improvement. And that's just the general feeling and safety within a building. So the survey measures student support, social emotional learning, school safety, and respect. It's a Likert scale. The way the survey breaks it down is if there's a score of a 3.4 or above, the responses were favorable. If it's anywhere from 2.5 to 3.4, it's sort of neutral. You know, it's like that forced choice, and like it's not good or bad. 2.5 and below is unfavorable. The responses fell in an unfavorable category. I color code them because that's how my brain works. And we always start at the high school. So we have two data sets as it relates to safety, climate, and culture for the high school Ps in this one. So there is no green. And in fact, in the area of social emotional learning, we saw an uptick from 19 to 20, and then 21, 22, we saw a dip. So that isn't great news for us. Now I don't want to make COVID the next best excuse for everything, and we do have to take their answers. This is well into the year, so this is May of 22. So we're talking like
We're past out COVID.
Yeah, you're in it. You have access to things. And so we saw a decline across all domains and their total climate score. These are the areas we've looked at originally way back when. The high school administration decided it. These are some of the telling things. So remember, we talked about bullying, threatening, attacks. So when you compare these, they're a little bit similar. So students are bullied in school. So if you look at simply the agreement category for 21, 50% of our kids say yes, kids are often bullied. Students at this school are teased and picked on. 65% of kids say yes, that happens. Students stop and think before doing anything when they get angry. 31% said, yeah, they do. They stop, they think, they talk it through. So actually the low number in this category is not good.
Not a good thing.
Which you're like, ooh, no. Students get into arguments when they disagree with people. Almost 70% of the kids said yes. That means a verbal. The word is really like that verbal altercation.
It's not surprising at all. I mean, the way the current climate is.
Students think it's okay to fight when somebody insults them. So 61% of kids said, yeah, it's okay to throw down. That's an increase.
If anybody's girls, they should wrestle.
We're gonna make referrals to the wrestling team. Students say mean things to other students when they think the other student deserves it. 65% of kids say they do. When students in this school already know the material that's being taught, the teachers give them more advanced assignments. Only 30% of kids felt like that was the experience they were having. So all of these are the responses that fell in the unfavorable category for the high school. So when we fast forward to the middle school, we're like solidly neutral at the middle school.
Like Switzerland.
Yeah.
I feel like that's middle schoolers in general.
Yeah. I mean, when we average the domain scores across the board, we are like solidly neutral. Not so much when we ask questions. When asked if they're bullied, it fell in neutral, but 40% of kids said yes. Similar questions, right? We're comparing high school and middle school, similar questions. 65% of kids felt like they were teased. When asked about safety, almost 91% of the middle school kids said, yes, in fact, I do. And that's good. I mean, there's a little dip, but certainly it's a favorable response. I sometimes stay home because I don't feel safe. Our kids, only 9% of the population last year said that would be them, and that's a favorable response.
So double though from.
It is, yeah. From
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Students stop and think, same question. 36% say they stop and think. Kids get into arguments when they disagree. 61% of middle schoolers said, yep, that's what happens. We try to work out their disagreements by talking. Only 47% said that was the approach they took. And this one is about student support. I'm bored in class. 70% of kids said, well, now think about the pace. Why am I doing this? I mean, there is a thread there where they have, it's true. On a second metric, they have confirmed that they're not connecting and we can argue. And now we get to our elementary schools. This is the one survey where we do. 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders are surveyed, and they're so darn cute.
Oh, they Russell.
I'm sure they do. We're sending out flowers.
Maybe on the playground. I think I saw them.
You can, Mike.
So, again, we fall in the neutral category, but I'm happy to report when we dig into questions, kids are feeling pretty good. When asked if they can give me help, 96% of our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders says, sure they do. They care about me, 93%. I feel responsible for how I act, 91%, or almost 92, right? That's a little bit. We'll take it as a win. We'll take it as a win. Because there's a lot of work happening in second step that we're going to take that. I think about how others feel. And the act of empathy is something that ties directly to the work that our second step curriculum is targeting. And so, we're seeing a very favorable response. I respect what others think. Also, central to that relationship piece, almost 90%. I am kind. Almost 95% of kids said, yes, I want to know who those 5% are. We're gonna find them. We're gonna convert them. I try to understand how others think and feel. 88% increase from last year, but that act of self-recognition and understanding, that EQ part, 3rd graders may struggle. And so that's the point of some of those programs that we've implemented. And I help others. 94% of kids say yes, they do.
It's so interesting sometimes when you talk to younger kids though. I'm like, so you just hit him. How do you think he felt about it? I don't know. And then you're like, so what might you say? Like, well, it was an accident, Mrs. Stevens, so like, what might you say? I don't know. I'm sorry. Like, just say sorry if you accidentally knocked into someone. And they don't think to say those simple things.
Well, they don't learn that at home.
Yeah.
And I just said to Emily, what part of these surveys calculate parenting? Because we all know.
Well, and again, it goes back to the earlier, in the survey earlier, which is, why am I here, right? Why do I come to school? If you ask these kiddos, some of them really don't know why. And that's an issue, that's a concern. When you're having that conversation of, especially because we know how important it is that a kiddo has to read by the time they're in 3rd grade. And if they don't know the reason that's why they're there, of course they're there for other reasons than just to learn to read, we get that. But if they don't know that fundamentally, then what are we as a school, right? What do we do? And again, I think that goes back to home. I think it goes back to us articulating to them, why are we here?
But I'm gonna.
Not for the lunch and breakfast, we're here for,
I'm gonna give a plug
Yeah,
again. Somebody must be, I don't know why I keep talking about school, but I'm gonna plug it again. I'm sorry.
Commercial.
Yeah. But I will say, the mentality, I think, for a core team developing school-wide for pre-K, coming into kindergarten is, it is so okay if they come in not understanding or not knowing matters. It's okay if they don't have any of those skills. I think the starting point from school-wide for those kids coming in, it's always right at the beginning, that first week of school, first week and a half, we are teaching, and then it is ongoing. But I think that's the mentality from the core team, and then it spreads out to the teachers and staff. It's okay. And then we teach, and that's through those lessons.
And we, yesterday, well, actually, over the past month or so, we've had our early intervention students coming in and their families coming in. And that is a conversation because parents are very concerned with, you know, kindergarten readiness and, you know, that their child may not know all of their letters and all of this and that and whatever. And, you know, what we say in those meetings is the first month of school, really, kindergartners are learning how to be students. And they're learning, you know what I mean? They're learning those kinds of things. So they don't need to come in having all of these, you know, knowing all of their letters, numbers, you know.
They don't have to have calculus.
Right, they don't need to be doing any physics or anything like that.
I didn't know my letters either, but I could throw a fastball.
You don't mind if they come in knowing all those things and they're reading at the
Right,
school? That's
yeah.
all good too.
And pre-academic skills are great, but all kids have different backgrounds and experiences, so.
So when-
Think about that one time.
One of the things we try to do when we're developing K-12 programs is look at patterns in data to see sort of where things stop going in the favorable direction. And so, you know, when asked about, you know, do my teachers care about me, there's greater sense of that in elementary school. And then it steadily declines, right? And so,
Yeah, it does.
you know, and sometimes there's this notion that the older you get, the less you need. I would say that's unequivocally incorrect. In fact, I think it's the inverse, right? So the older you get, the more support you need because potentially you're dealing with far more coming in at you socially, emotionally, academically. And so that just looks different. Levels of boredom range too. You know, we even see in elementary school, sometimes our fifth graders say they're more bored. You know, and the awe of being in school for some of our K-3 kids is great. So, you know, I think we look at that when we're talking about being bullied. That's a trend that's pretty consistent. We have kids who consistently at every level report bullying. Kids' ability to resolve conflict also diminishes. I think also what happens is teachers are supporting that dialogue in elementary school, conversing, you know, helping kids understand what you could have said in the absence of, you know, throwing hands. Where in middle and high school, kids are just going to throw hands. Like, they're just going to go for it. Just because that bump was intentional. I knew it. I saw it on social media. And so, you know, I think that their ability to solve those conflicts with everything that they have on their plate just looks different. And this team and this group will know we made some recommendations and we've been deploying them. Responsive classroom and restorative practices in order to sort of really target that particular area, that think before I act, resolve conflict with your words, you know, sort of accept responsibility for your actions and repair the harm you've caused. And all of that is done through teaching at the secondary level.
That's what I thought when you were talking to that kid. It's like, you're doing restorative practices, you know, it's like, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And really ingraining that and equipping all of our staff to have those kids have those conversations in a safe place instead of just doling out discipline. It's really about teaching. And sometimes we don't think we need to do that at the secondary level, and that's not correct.
Are we training our secondary staff on restorative justice
are.
and restorative practices?
Yep, so Carol and I, Brian, we've worked with a group of teachers, Mr. Ansler, and we've been training a cohort of teachers this school year. We've worked with our paraprofessionals.
All parents.
And our special area teachers at the secondary level. They're all getting restorative practices training. And the feedback has overwhelmingly been, I didn't have the language, now I do. And so restorative practices gives them the language to be able to address some of these concerns with our kids. You know, sometimes it's hard to relate to a 15-year-old who's feeling those big emotions or who's having a Armageddon-like conflict with a friend. It's hard to have some of those words sometimes, and so to be able to efficiently deal with it is what restorative practice is.
Part of that teaching male teachers to talk to female students in a certain way and vice versa?
So we don't, differentiate by gender or
It's
anything.
just general.
It's just some general terms, like, instead of saying, one I always pull out, instead of saying, why did you do that? If you look at a student and you say, what happened? Those are two very different ways to get the same answer. And so equipping our teachers with those toolboxes, you've now completely, or maybe not completely, but you've really de-escalated the situation because you're saying, what happened here? Instead of, why did you do that? Or what did you do?
Totally different.
Totally different way of
Totally
speaking to a child, and you're still going to get the same response out of them. So restorative practices really gives us those tools.
Yeah. And we've talked about this for years, just making kids have to have the conversation. We know when we do something wrong, the worst part of it is like admitting it, and then having to figure out how you're going to fix it. And restorative practices really sort of pulls that out of kids to know that everybody makes mistakes, everybody does things that they regret. It's not okay, but it's not going to be the end of the world as long as we work on fixing it.
And beyond that, it gives them an opportunity to rebuild the relationship, to be able to reacclimate themselves to the class or with the individual that was involved in the conflict. Because so often when students have an issue, they end up feeling disconnected from that teacher they had the conflict with, or uncomfortable in the class because now they're humiliated or embarrassed or whatever the case might be. So restorative practices not only addresses the issue, it teaches how to be better, and then it brings them back into the community.
And just to add to that, the nice thing about it is all along the way, they have the adult trained support to guide them.
I was just thinking that, Carol. I was just thinking, we're helping the adults be adults. To talk in adult language and not react like a kid would.
And to that point, we said when we brought in restorative practices, we said we have Second Step, and it is a wonderful program, but it's for kids. So restorative practices now gives the adults the tools they need to meet the kids with what they're learning. So,
absolutely.
So if I can comment on that, I've been trained in restorative practice for 20 years, use it at the middle level. I think what I started since I came is when students misbehave, if you will, or are asked to leave the classroom, scheduling a time for the teacher and the student to meet, and I facilitate it, to have that safe opportunity, because the solution isn't always to remove a student permanently, and so how does that look like? That feedback has been great. The other thing I will also say is it teaches kids how to talk to each other and not at each other, and I think that skill set with COVID, and I'm not blaming it, but we forgot how to interact with each other. And then lastly, what I've heard a lot from the high school staff is we'd like to know just a little bit more about our kids. So whether they're seeking a tier 2 or any type of outside support, what can you share versus the need to know and the want to know stuff. And so, I know with the counselors, we're talking about what can you share, with these teachers, so that it does, I think, drive maybe how they interact, or looking at assignments and saying, these are really what I need to assess that versus just for compliance purposes.
Yeah, I think it humanizes kids' experience for adults. And that sometimes it's very easy to get into your day and do your job, but sometimes you have to pause and realize that these are real people.
Yeah, not widgets, they're human beings, so everybody's different.
We do ask our parents, though, what they think in the PA Climate Survey.
We know.
And, the survey questions are, not as granular, let me say that. But, when asked if the school provides good support with learning problems, I think that we are seeing 66%. That's a slide. I will say one of the things we've experienced for kids who struggled during the pandemic, and we say it of our own accord, it was hard to get to them, right? I mean, they were home and we were trying, but We all know virtual for kids who really struggled was not ideal, and I think our parents just confirmed that again for us on the survey. I would recommend the school, 70%. We're at about the same as the previous year. I feel like I'm actively involved. 82% of the survey respondents said yes. My child is safe, almost 88%. And I'm satisfied with communication, 77%.
The numbers, like next to K3, it says 32. Is that how many responses?
Correct.
Okay, so with all these numbers, obviously, with the numbers being so low, who
Yeah.
normally fills out the survey? You go to McDonald's or Dunkin' Donuts and fill out the survey. Everybody was really nice to me. You fill out the survey and go, I'm angry, you know?
Yeah, you're either really, really happy or really, really
Well-
angry.
Yeah, so there, I mean,
The numbers used to be better though, Mike.
what's that?
The numbers used to be better.
No, I get that, I get
And we
that.
used to have more people complete the survey. So this is where I will concede, and I think Jeff and I had a conversation about this at one point. I think sometimes when it comes from, I'm gonna say me, I mean like, and I don't mean me as a person, but the Ed Center, it's sort of deep, it creates this degree of separation where if it comes from Jeff and it's Jeff's survey, his interactions with these parents exceed mine to the nth degree because who comes to me, you know, you see who comes to me. And so, you know, I wonder if this is a
Feels like
part.
more noise from you than it would. feels
Correct,
like
or they're like,
Yeah.
oh, delete.
Yeah.
Where when it comes from Jeff or Allie or Jen or Rob or Chris and Brian, like they're like, oh, my principal has something to say to me, they want to know something. And they're more, I just feel like maybe,
So can we roll it out?
But one recommendation, I come from Title I, school-wide Title I school, where we had to do a parent partnership survey, we had to do a cultural norm survey of our staff as well. One thing that we found to be successful is to do that parent partnership survey right after when you have everybody captured, parent-teacher conferences. Hey, click this, take the survey before you walk out the door, right? That way you're capturing 100% of your families, assuming 100% are showing up. And they're in your environment, they're right there answering, as honestly as possible. And we get great response rate.
yeah. And I think I've watched over time since we've administered the parent survey that we have to make a change just to get that feedback. The kids are captured.
Yeah.
It's only the
Right.
parents who don't consent, who don't take it, so it's almost the entire population.
So you're
I mean, what
thinking-
you're seeing is almost every third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th.
So you're considering rolling it out differently?
Yeah, and it might not even be this particular survey. I think there might be other surveys. I think this one is, there are better options for us to get the principals and teachers what they need. That's what I think. This is great for us, for program planning and development. I think a true reflection of sort of the experience that families are having. I don't know if this one will get us what we could really operationalize and make change around.
I would imagine it would still be pretty challenging for high school. I mean, Jen, I don't know if you
Yeah.
have any thoughts on how you would roll that out to get more high school parents to respond to the survey. I mean,
Free swag.
Yeah, I was gonna say open house. You do have a bunch of people who still come to parent-teacher conferences. Maybe a basketball game like out front? No, I mean,
It's before the game. Meet the
We're
teacher
not
night,
after,
though.
right?
Everybody goes to meet the teacher night. That's a big one.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, something to think about.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have some work and some brainstorming to do.
You could put it in the town and country.
I'm gonna get to Bradley. So these are two surveys that we have used pretty historically since I've been here. But it has really been utilized to craft our mental behavioral health framework. And this is a labor of love and passion on a lot of people's part in order to expand the services to kids. And so we've made reference to how we deal with kids who are sad, who are disengaged, who have housing and food instability, who demonstrate self-harm. And the people you see around this table facilitate how kids access that framework. And so MTSS is something on the academic side we've talked about a long time ago. What we've really tried to do is to put into practice the efforts on the mental and behavioral health side. I know some of you have been on the board long enough to know that that was a concern, right? That was a concern. Kids aren't getting help, they're not getting fast enough.
Yep.
What are we doing for these kids? We know they're struggling. And so we do have a pretty extensive mental and behavioral health framework. You can see, hopefully, I can make it bigger, that our principals facilitate a process in which it funnels through a group. Child study at our elementary schools. The middle school calls it child study / MTSS. And the high school has generally relied on the SAP committee. And so when needs are brought to that group, that team collects a lot of information related to what those concerns are. They look at a lot of factors, and they first ask the teacher, how can you help? Here are some strategies. But then as the child needs more support, they go down to accessing multiple levels of care. Some kids essentially could be getting every support we have, plus we've made a referral to SAP, which is a county organization that comes in and they provide an assessment of kids and make recommendations around supports. This, if you look, this isn't in your packet. This has been a concerted effort to explain who does what, how they do it, and this is currently what our mental health framework, the people involved. And so we have 8 school counselors. You will see that the school counselors provide a ton of Tier 2 supports, but please know, we're going to look at their data in an infographic next. School counselors have a job that is so diverse that it is hard to quantify their value, truthfully, because the buildings would go like this without them. I truly believe that. But please know that they provide direct service to kids. Our secondary counselors provide academic advisement while trying to meet mental health needs. But they also provide indirect service. They are our liaisons between mental health providers. Generally, if you're an upset parent and the teacher didn't, answer your email, who's the first person you call? I mean, me today. I call the counselor. And so they're negotiating that. They also help with program planning and support. What goes unnoticed oftentimes for counselors is how much responsibility they have to pull things off, like AP testing, like Keystone testing, like Act 339, artifact collection. Like, these things don't live on the radar of school counselors' world. But we also have 4 student assistance counselors. They can provide some Tier 2 support, which would be like small groups. These 4 women currently are doing all of our risk assessments. So anytime a child comes to us through BARC, which is a platform that monitors what kids are putting in their emails and Google Docs, it's marked severe and it's self-harm. Anytime a Safe to Stay comes in, anytime a teacher reports or a peer comes to them and says, I think that this, my friend or this student is in danger, they happen to be all women. These are the women we call on to assess the urgency around those self-harm, suicide ideation, suicide planning.
And these are for different people than the top 8?
Correct.
Okay, there's no overlap
There is no overlap. So that looks like our Tier 1 service on that flow chart and our Tier 3. And if you navigate, you'll see that those are locally funded positions. Now, we also have 5 lakeside counselors. So all of the box here, this little blue box, is done by federally funded counselors. So they work in tandem with our teams. They are who we refer kids to, and if any principal wants to jump in, you do this every day. But they pick up cases of kids who need an additional layer of support. And then we also have a prevention counselor at the high school and middle school who can co-treat for mental health needs, but primarily sees our drug and alcohol violators. As part of our policy, we put in a buffer that if you offend, which could be an expulsion recommendation, we won't make that recommendation as long as you access our SAP program and you agree to prevention counseling with our prevention counselor. Let's try rehabilitation. Let's try and fill your bucket in another way other than drugs and alcohol. Go ahead, Jeff.
Can I go back to the Lakeside counselor for a
Oh,
moment?
sure.
And please correct me if I'm wrong in what I'm saying. This is something that we didn't have before. That when I came back, we had already in place here. This is somebody who is a therapist, who works in our school, there every day, on the ground, has an office, but is not a teacher, not one of our counselors. I can't express how invaluable that role has been to us as an elementary school. To say to a family that may not trust the school for whatever reason, or may not, the needs that that child is presenting with or the family is presenting with is not something that a typical school counselor can manage or should be asked to handle. That Lakeside counselor is somebody who we can say, this is somebody who we work with, but it's a confidential process, just as if your child was going to therapy outside of school, outside of the school day. That person works with us hand in hand, sits in our meetings with us every day. They don't share what's happening in the therapy, it's not appropriate, but what they do is really help us present a continuum of services to our families, a genuine continuum of services to our family that I really do appreciate, like every day.
The other thing that I would mention as well, I would second everything Jeff just said, but they also will sit in our meetings with us at the middle school, and they'll work with the team to develop supports that can be delivered by the teachers within the classroom as well. So they're providing additional advice and support for the teachers to help support their kids.
So thank you for being able to have that access to that service.
So when we think about those level of supports, our Lakeside counselors and our prevention counselors are federally funded positions. And so we knew when we wrote the grants for them that they would expire, they would extinguish. And so they will cease in June of '24. But we write grants, we're working on grant writing around them. So, you know, and working on a strategy to continue to support. But those are part of that framework. We also have our Creative Health SAP liaison who attends. They do all of our evaluations. They're an external resource intended to link families with agencies outside of the district. But it can only be done with parent consent. And I have the data, but I can show you there are hundreds of SAP referrals made and a handful of parents that consent to accessing those services. And most of the time, they are drug and alcohol offenders because the alternative is expulsion. So they're like, yes, I'll sign the paper. But I mean, it is essentially defeating. SAP is a great process. They have a lot of linkages that they can use. Our families do not use it that way. And so, but where we were 2 years ago is we made those SAP referrals and then that was it. Now, if they don't want to agree to SAP, then we assign them to an internal Lakeside or to our Lincoln Center counselor. So we're like, okay, then you're still going to get support. We're going to meet you where you are and give you what you need. And then there are some families who have to have it all. They have to have it all. And that's okay. So we also have school psychologists. We have, the board supported a position for a BCBA for this year. I'm sad to report to you, we have not had one qualified candidate to interview since August. So, it's frustrating. It's a very, very
That
difficult.
sucks, I'll say it.
It does, and do you know who it's the worst for? Kids. And I think that this group would agree with me that Dr. Teller is a rock star, but she is one woman.
Why do you think there's no, is it the pay, is it there's?
So BCBA cert is an intense certification. To work in a private group and be a BCBA, they're making $80,000 out of the gate. To move into a teacher contract, which we try to sell the benefits because there are. I mean, let's just say it, there are a ton of benefits to being in a teacher contract. They would come in the 50s. I can't, there's nothing I can spice up, and they don't generally have school experience. So they're gonna start at Bachelor Zero. That's just where they're gonna start. And so this is where your credential in a private world is gonna pay you dividends. And we can't compete. And they are a part of that group in our contract. So we don't really have any flexibility. So the other thing that we're working on is I wrote a grant at the beginning of this year through some funds that became available for a school district social worker. And I see a lot of people nod because there's a lot of home visits that are done by our administrators because we don't have a homeschool visitor or a social worker. So we send Rodney out to accompany administrators and counselors to do some of that work, find kids, look for families, investigate situations. So it's still pending. It was submitted in July, and I'm still waiting. So that is through 2025. So maybe. So this is it, folks, and this is the last snapshot. I collect, and with the help of our administrators, so much data from our counselors to paint a picture, and at the end of the year, I'll do a sort of state of the department debrief. But this is just our department at a glance, from August 31st to November 1st. And I say, I want you to note that date because that's not a lot of time. But it's broken down by tiers and the level of support. So if you look at tier 1, you're thinking school counselor. And so when you're thinking about the direct service or mental health counseling that they did with students, there were 1,772 student check-ins. So in that window, our counselors across the district, for which we have 8, sought out and made 1,772 contacts with kids for a particular reason. Individual counseling sessions, there were 1,431 times that our counselors across the district pulled kids in to talk to them about something. And this is mental health related. This is not academically related. We ran 329 small group sessions. There were 329 students who were assigned to small groups in that window of time through our MTSS framework. And there were 232 small group meetings that were conducted by our team. When we look at academic advisement, 252 course reschedules. Now, you can imagine where the bulk of that lives, right? That's our secondary counselors. I need you to know, Teresa Slatterer meets with every single kid on her caseload. And so, she's making sure she is in contact. They conduct lessons at our elementary, and so they taught in classrooms and conducted 97 lessons in that window. They collected or facilitated the collection of artifacts 47 times. So They are sort of the people who keep us honest in our Act 339 artifact collection. And they facilitated 512 college applications at the secondary. So,
Can we just
count-
go back? I'm sorry, I don't know what artifact collection is.
Oh.
So, we typically
Trying to
talked
figure it
about
out.
this at another, a while ago, Emily. Act 339 requires that students participate in investigating what they want to do in their future. And so we have to have a series of activities that they do with an artifact. So in other words, they don't just go to a job fair, they have to reflect on it. And there are 6 artifacts needed for 5th graders, 6 for 8th graders, and 8 for 11th graders. And so we collect those through a program called Smart Futures, which the board has funded and we appreciate very much.
Sure.
So it's something that's tracked, we get audited on that. If we were to get audited on PSSAs or Keystones, they would come in and they would also look at that to make sure we reported that we did 8 artifacts for Brian, we have one similar time.
So an artifact is like a response or a reflection to, okay. Okay, thank you.
We put the caseload information in there for you because we report out on it. The recommendation is 250 students to 1 counselor. Hold your breath. That's the recommendation. I think the average, though, in the country is around 470 some. So we're pretty close to the national average, but I don't know too many districts that are close to the recommendation. So we're not, we're in with the rest of the group there, but.
You referenced that one counselor that meets with every kid on her caseload. Are we assuming the others do not do that?
So, yeah, I mean, that may or may not happen. Like, it would be, Jeff Bibas has 506 kids in Hereford.
So that would be tough.
That's a lot of kids, and they're 5 to, So, I think it becomes a volume issue. I would love to, and maybe he does, I would love to say yes.
No, the answer's no.
But
I can't tell you that now. I don't have to check. He's not meeting individually with 506 kids.
So he has the highest caseload of all of our
We have other
counselors.
responsibilities throughout the day, it's just not feasible.
So the student check-ins, the
Yeah.
1772, that's 2 months worth
Correct.
over the 8 counselors, right? So it's roughly 5.5 check-ins a day is what it boils down to. That's just the check-ins. That's not individual sessions or anything else.
And sessions, so check-ins are generally somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes. Counseling sessions can be 30 minutes to 3 hours. And truthfully, I've seen counselors be with a particular student the entirety of a school day. I think, I'm looking at all the heads nodding. And so I wouldn't even say every day they have. One day could be monopolized with a kid. A risk assessment from start to finish, when the child is, in a significant rate and you need to do the extended risk assessment, you're looking at an hour to complete it, 2.5 for perhaps the parent to come and get, because we're either going to call the EMTs, we're going to make an ER referral, or we're going to wait for mobile crisis. So tier 2 are our Lakeside folks. These are after the child gets some additional help at tier 1. The team will make a recommendation for a higher level of care. Our Lakeside students see 73 students. Our Lakeside, that's their caseload, 73 students by those 5. They've done 463 student check-ins. To be fair, TLC, which is our prevention counselor, started October 3rd. So it took us a while to find somebody credentialed for drug and alcohol counseling. So that really represents October to November. I anticipate her next report, which is due next week, is going to be pretty high. Tier 3 are locally funded, our student assistance counselors. In mental health counseling, they do 200 student check-ins. I can tell you the time that they take is generally a lot longer. They conducted in those 2 months 353 individual counseling sessions. They have 61 students that they meet, and they run small groups. They had 67 small group meetings. These are our highest level of care providers. Our student assistance counselors are licensed therapeutic counselors. I mean, they have the credentials to provide it. We do not provide therapy, though. We provide counseling. And they remind me of that very clear distinction. So, I'll tell you that. What they do is handle all of our crises. So we had 75 suicide risk assessments in 2 months. They established 22 safety plans. And so safety plans really look like, and our principals work with them to do that. You know, how is this child going to navigate the environment and not harm themselves or someone else? Reentry meetings, when our kids have to be hospitalized and come back in, we developed a reentry plan. If they have if they demonstrated suicide ideation where they were planned, we make them go get evaluations, and then we have reentry meetings. They take a lot of time because this child is obviously in a place that they may or may not be safe. And so mobile crisis contacts are 3. Mobile Crisis is a wonderful organization that is so far from us that it takes hours for them to get here. I'm actively working on a grant to get a mobile crisis counselor funded through Access to be in the district. Where are they located, mobile crisis? I don't know, Norris County? Yeah.
Everything is down
Down there.
We've had to we sent 2 children to the hospital because of severe suicide ideation. They did 3 home visits, and they made 38 outside agency contacts. So they had to facilitate the care and safety of those children, whether it be through their provider or another provider, in trying to get them help. I share the SAP data with you at the bottom because in that short period of time, there were 156 SAP referrals made. So our teams reviewed 156 cases. 74 families said, sure, I'll consent to SAP.
Of the 156.
Yep. Only 18 of those 156 let Creative Health conduct the screening and make recommendations. There were 11 screenings that they continued to attempt to try. So of those 18 that got consent, 11 screenings were attempted but not completed. However, they did accept 14 support agencies. From those 156, we had to refer them to a school-based team. So our school-based team said, nope, we gotta move them down to a level of care. Malvern represented 19 referrals, Lakeside 67, and our prevention counselor 6. So SAP is wonderful, but if only 18 parents consent to it out of 156, we have to do something. And so that is our conversation very often. And so this is truthfully a snapshot, but I wanted to paint the picture of what your mental health framework looks like. It's a lot.
Yeah, I'm always wondering why parents don't consent.
Is it a stigma? Is it a?
So I think it's both. So I think they want it, and then they don't because they don't maybe want the school, even though they would have to sign consent for release for us to know. Because I asked them, I mean, historically, having done this job, I can tell you that's what it is. I'll get it on my own. Well, if you go out and try to get mental health services on your own, there's a 6 to 9 month wait. And so I think a lot of times we're trying to really hard sell. I will say the SAP team, I've seen growth since I got here, having been on a SAP team for many years, where the team collects data and really is starting to say, let's get parent input, let's get them involved. Maybe it's not a level of an assessment, but here's what we can offer. So I think having this menu, if you will, of resources is really advantageous. I think if we could have like an outside counselor come school-based so that they didn't have to do it after school or drive because of work. So I think a lot of it is that too. I think it's how you sell it, it's how you pitch it. And kids might want it, but parents, for whatever financial reasons, transportation reasons, can't do it.
But there isn't a financial aspect to it, right? I mean, if it's your,
In some
is
cases.
it something insurance?
If it's outside services that are being recommended, you have to keep in mind insurance that what that covers.
So, just on the horizon, you know, my intention is to bring back the data after winter, and then at the end of the year, to paint a picture of this is 2 months of what's happening, and what's happening with our kids, and now those surveys inform. Some of this really doesn't surprise us, because we know what they've already told us, right? We know. It's just how do we continue to you know, create additional safety nets, the intensive school-based counseling. So the county just received a $5 million grant for the 23 school districts in Montgomery County. So we can write for a minimum of $200,000. You bet. It's due March 3rd, which is really close to somebody's birthday.
Then you get to celebrate.
Are you finished writing? But you have to know, listening and hearing the feedback is that, you know, mobile crisis being, I mean, it could be hours, truthfully. We've heard things like, we'll be there in 2 hours. Well, we're in a, you know, and they're great. Please, they're as stretched as any organization. They just really are. And so we're writing, and I'm working with Access to get a mobile crisis worker in district, in an office, funded by grants, to try and help that. Writing for intensive outpatient evening in the district, provided by, you know, a group like Lakeside or the Lincoln Center, so that families, we're providing it, it's grant funded, it's in our community. They can walk there. So, you know, and those are open to us. We can write for no less than 200,000, but really, it's open. If you ask the counselors and the counseling team what we need, they'll tell you we need a transitional program for kids coming in and out of mental health placements. Or we're struggling to program for them here, and so a short-term 2 to 6 week transitional program before we can get them back in school. Kids aren't ready to re-enter when they've had a mental health crisis. They just aren't. And so, you know, those are things that are out there, but sustainability is obviously critical.
Can I just add one thing about, this is something that I've seen, the high school counselors do an amazing job connecting with families. Like the amount of time they spend talking to families and listening, and a lot of it is just that. That's what parents need, right? To feel normal, that some of what they're experiencing is okay and or maybe not okay. And so they do a tremendous job, and I don't think that data is in here. I don't think that their time spent does it justice, because, you know, I've never once have they ever said, no, I'm not going to do that, or and they will stop everything to work with a parent. So I do this data. I mean, it's amazing, but I don't think it captures half the stuff that they really do.
Oh, it most certainly doesn't. We have that data, and you know, because you've seen it, we keep the number of parent contacts that they, the volume of contacts that our counselors have are incredible. So, that was a lot.
And I said this last year, and I think that, I mean, the way that Dr. Farina tends to these surveys and shares that information, but also the teams, like, you can hear the advocacy for kids, and you can hear the advocacy for our counselors. And I've been a lot of places, and I've not seen that same care and level of detail and passion for it. So I'm always, as much as I love this, no, I do love this meeting, because we get to see all the efforts and that it is paying off. We don't always love the data. It's kind of sad to see, but I do think we're making strides, and I'm really proud to be a part of the team working on all that.
I sent you that information on the Big Act.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to keep an eye on
I
it.
saw it.
Yeah.
I was like,
From what I understand, it passed.
okay.
So just keep an eyeball on it.
things. But, I mean, I think I'm passionate because, you know, this place has a personal connection for me, and that's, I mean, I'm not going out on that. I'll do everything in my power to make sure that, you know, we don't ever hopefully lose anyone else from the district, so. Are there any questions?
On a side note, I just want to thank everyone for all of your work and what you're doing for kids. I mean, you know, I don't want to say I've been in your shoes, although Jen, I've been in your shoes, but, you know, it's just getting more and more challenging to do what we do, and please know that, I think I can speak for all the board members here, we are greatly appreciative of all the work you do.
Well, and I think that, again, and she's my boss, and, you know, back this up, right? But again, in 10 years, to see the level of support in this area has been driven by Dr. Farina largely, but we have to have you guys to help and support. And so the feeling is neutral. You get it, you understand what we're facing every day, but in the building, knowing that we have that support from that staff counselor, lakeside counselors, et cetera, that we just didn't have before. I don't know what we would do without it. So thank you.
And then once we get them, we need to stay because we fill up their time really quickly. So yes, we're so grateful. Thank you. All right.
Cool. All right.
Pizza, Marlboro bar, if you're interested.
We all like
And next week is the kindness challenge.
Thanks. Is that, so, boy, geez, I hate to, does anybody have any final questions or anything like that? Because we're kind of through everything, right? Okay. So,
Does anybody have an umbrella?
I have two, they're in my car.
They always are.
Of course they are.
I think that's,
It could have been worse, I could have had my life wrapping off, and I would have had a run home. I just would have gotten right home with you then.
That's what you think.
At least I admit.
jump in.
All right, cool. So, what Peg said, yes, thank you everyone for coming tonight, really great. Our next meeting is February 16th. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. No. You got to the voting part, you got to the
Jeff,
voting
can
part.
you hit the red button over there?
Dr. Farina, what's your final?
Thank you. Thanks for the mints.
Listen, I print one time a year. You got it.
Well worth it.
Having the minutes was helpful.
Seems like it's still recording, yeah? Oh, there's one up here too.